The year 2021 marks the 30th anniversary of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Its legacies are still present in the political, social, and ideological landscape of today's Russia and the former Soviet republics. Today's confrontation between Russia and the West is commonly seen through the prism of the Cold War, in which the US-led capitalist world was engaged in an existential struggle with the socialist world led by the Soviet Union. In this video, we talk about what the Soviet Union was and how an attempt to reform it ended in its disintegration. By the 1970s, the Soviet Union was showing clear signs of stagnation. It was a formidable military powerhouse that instilled fear in the Western world. But it was hopelessly losing its competition with Western consumer society. The Soviet economy failed to satisfy its citizens' growing demands and suffered from chronic shortages. The infatuation with Western consumerism and pop cultures undermined Soviet propaganda, which continued to emphasize the advantages of socialism over capitalism. A range of informal, black market economic practices evolved as a parallel shadow economy. Further, agriculture was a disaster. The Soviet Union, despite its vast fertile lands, was forced to import grain. A striking symbol of the system's decay was its aging leaders. By the end of his 18-year rule, Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev was a sick old man who was barely able to move or speak, and who had become a target for endless popular jokes. After his death in 1982, two consecutive successors died within a span of about 2 years. The symbol was too powerful. The country badly needed reforms. The new, much younger leader selected in 1985 by the Soviet Union's highest ruling body, the Politburo of the Communist Party Central Committee, was Mikhail Gorbachev, who soon began to talk about perestroika, or restructuring. The Chernobyl nuclear catastrophe further illustrated the deep decay in the entirety of the old system and strengthened Gorbachev's drive for reform. Gorbachev's early moves included the decision to withdraw Soviet troops from Afghanistan after a senseless 10-year-long war, and the release of political prisoners, including Soviet nuclear scientist turned disarmament and human rights activist Andrei Sakharov. Sakharov had been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize while in the Soviet Union he had been confined to internal exile. Gorbachev also launched a policy of Glasnost, or openness, that put an end to many decades of total state censorship. Glasnost unleashed emotional public discussions of many topics that had been banned. Communist terror under Joseph Stalin was exposed and condemned. Soon, mass street rallies were demanding that Article 6, which defined the Communist Party as the leading and guiding force of the Soviet society and the nucleus of its political system, be removed from the Soviet Constitution. Gorbachev, himself the Communist Party's supreme leader, also undertook to limit the authority of the Communist Party in order to weaken the party's anti-reformist hardliners. Instead, he empowered the Soviets, the formal legislative bodies of the Soviet Union, which had been controlled by the Communist Party. The Soviets were to be revived by means of contested elections, which generated bustling campaign activity with broad public participation. Reducing the power of the Communist Party was highly popular among the Soviet people, but the newly elected bodies turned out to be unwieldy and disorganized. Besides, there was no longer an operational connecting mechanism to implement those decisions. Critics believe that this was Gorbachev's fundamental miscalculation. Just as he embarked on large-scale reforms, he disempowered the only force capable of keeping the country under control. Empowering the Soviets unleashed nationalist sentiments in the Soviet Union's constituent republics. First in the 3 Baltic republics, the last to be annexed to the Soviet Union, and soon followed by the nationalist rise in Georgia, Armenia, Ukraine, and other republics. By the late 1980s, nationalist movements in the Baltics were demanding national independence. The Soviet leadership had relied on the pyramid-like hierarchy of the Communist Party to keep the republics together. With the party being progressively undermined and the Soviets empowered, Gorbachev devolved power to the republics, thereby exchanging a unitary structure for a federalized one. Reforming the Soviet economy would involve introducing a market economy to the long-established hyper-centralized command economy in a gigantic country, where everything from industrial plants to food stores and car repairs was owned by the state. Meanwhile, the ongoing dismantling of the Communist Party apparatus dramatically weakened state control. Gorbachev was temporizing, making inconsistent moves, and enacting half measures. The deepening economic chaos created unparalleled opportunities for those with experience in the informal economy, who rapidly enriched themselves at the expense of the weakening state. Gorbachev desperately needed Western financial support. But watching the Soviet Union plunge into chaos, the West lingered by trying to minimize the risks of a collapsing Soviet Union to itself.
The United States discussed it and rejected it. We don't want, they decided, to support the Soviet Union and to help the Soviet Union to stay as it is. Meaning that with big defense industries capable of producing armaments and waging big wars. So the fear that the Soviet Union would not be changed, and even if it were modernized, would remain a rival of the United States, was clearly on the table. Was it present? In the light of later events, maybe present, but at that time, I think it was a missed opportunity to do more.
Gorbachev's Perestroika inspired anti-communist movements in the countries of Eastern Europe, which had been controlled by the Soviet Union since the end of the Second World War. Anxious to demonstrate that the Soviet Union was no longer an empire of evil, Gorbachev made it clear that he would no longer hold its satellites by force. In short order, he started to withdraw Soviet troops from Eastern Europe and enabled the reunification of Germany, which had been divided since the late 1940s into the Federal Republic of Germany and the Soviet-controlled German Democratic Republic. These moves gave rise to Gorby mania in the West and earned Gorbachev a Nobel Peace Prize. Yet in the Soviet Union, many among the Communist Party elites were outraged at what they saw as a surrender of Soviet gains in the Second World War. The inconsistent reforms and the deepening shortages generated disillusionment with Gorbachev among a broad range of Soviet constituencies. His faltering attempts to forcibly suppress the secessionist movements in some of the Soviet republics worked to further invigorate their drive for independence. In Russia, still a constituent republic of the Soviet Union, Boris Yeltsin emerged as a people's leader who advocated for greater autonomy for the Russian Republic within the Soviet Union. Yeltsin engaged in political fights with Gorbachev. Elected in 1991 to the newly created position of President of Russia, Yeltsin drew on popular legitimacy, while Gorbachev was losing his public support and garnering resentment from the communist elites. Yeltsin did not call for the dissolution of the Soviet Union, but it was clear that an autonomous Russia would render the status of the Soviet authority uncertain. Gorbachev made desperate attempts to preserve the Union by reinventing it as a federation that the constituent republics would join. But as he was dramatically losing power, those attempts seemed doomed. The communist hardliners were growing more and more alarmed by the disruptive developments in the Soviet Union. And in the summer of 1991, when Gorbachev went on vacation to his Black Sea residence, they staged a coup. A group organized to isolate Gorbachev in his vacation house formed an emergency committee, and went on TV to announce that they were now in charge. Gennady Yanayev, Gorbachev's deputy, assumed presidential power. However, he did not produce a sense of confidence. TV viewers could see his hands trembling. The coup organizers did not have a clear plan of action and lacked popular support. Meanwhile, Yeltsin and his allies demonstrated resolve and cohesion, condemned the coup plotters, and 3 days later, the hardliners' coup ended in a crushing defeat. Yeltsin then sent a team of his supporters to bring Gorbachev and his family back to Moscow. Upon his return to Moscow, Gorbachev faced a new political reality. Yeltsin was calling the shots, and he had become politically irrelevant. The Soviet Union still nominally existed, but some of its constituent republics had already declared independence, while others had taken decisive steps in that direction. On December 25, 1991, Gorbachev passed the nuclear briefcase on to Yeltsin and left the Kremlin for good. The Soviet flag flying over the Kremlin was replaced by the Russian tricolor. In all likelihood, the disintegration of the USSR was inevitable, but by no means predestined to happen in that way or at that time. Burying the USSR was nobody's goal, and this was especially true for Mikhail Gorbachev, who had launched his long overdue reforms in an attempt to reinvigorate the declining Soviet system. These reforms may have been ill-conceived and eventually chaotic, but given the enormity of the task of reforming the Soviet Union, even a better plan most likely would have turned out badly.